When putting on a play, a major consideration is audience. Did you know, though, that audience is also a major consideration when writing, from beginning to middle to end, and particularly in argument writing? When you think about movies, a major consideration is audience. In writing, a major consideration from beginning to end is audience as well. Often when I teach 1551 or 1550, students will come to me and say, you know, those aren't the rules that I learned when I was in high school. Mrs. Smith wanted me to do this way, and she said that you always do this particular thing. Well, I have one solution that should work for you, and that is to switch up thinking of rules and instead think audience. Audience. Who is your reader going to be? When you were in high school, it might have been Mrs. Smith. And so it was entirely appropriate to follow Mrs. Smith's rules and to consider what she wanted. When you are in my class, it's entirely appropriate and pretty smart if you want a good grade to follow my rules and my requirements. Fortunately, what I'm going to do is teach you to write appropriately for an academic setting. So hopefully, the audience that you will write to in my class will also transfer into the other classes that you take at YSU. And you can use the same style, the same tone. But always, whenever you write, think audience. This isn't as hard as you might think. The truth is, you do it all the time. Let's do a little exercise to prove my point. All right? All I want you to do is imagine that you are driving down the street. Yeah, that's right. Imagine it. Little bit of traffic, sun's glaring through the front window. You want to make a little text message. Because of the sun, you can't really see it, so you have to look down with cupped hands. Next thing you know, there's a stop sign. You don't really notice it, and look out, look out! Ugh. First call, your BFF. How do you explain what happened? Next call, Mom. Now, what exactly do you say? Finally, it's court day. You stand before the judge, dressed in your cleanest, neatest clothing. What do you emphasize now? I imagine you told the truth, or some portion of it, in each of these instances. But didn't the words you used change? Didn't your tone? Did you emphasize something different for each audience? About now, you should be asking, what does an academic audience want in an argument? Here's a short list. You ought to pause the video right now and write these down. Thoughtful and thorough research, genuine questioning, original ideas, an addition to the conversation, conciseness and clarity, points supported by evidence, good proofreading, grammar, and mechanics. These are expected. A mature voice. And finally, accurate documentation of highly credible sources. Argument writing understands audience better than any kind of writing at all because it's so important. Let's take a look at the 5 different ways that audience should affect your argument. First, the choice of issue. Right from the beginning, that should be important. Second, your formulation of your case claim. Third, the form and structure you choose. We'll be learning 2, classical and Rogerian, for this class. The tone of your argument and the vocabulary that you select. When my colleagues and I grade college entrance papers, we notice sometimes that students use vocabulary inappropriately. In the worst case, it's a malaprop. You can look that up. It's where you use a word that does not fit the definition. It's just the wrong word completely. In the best case scenario, students are using words that make writing cumbersome and difficult to understand, and they're kind of using the vocabulary in the wrong place. Well, that's not considering audience. Your audience, no matter how educated that person is, will want to read something that is clear and says exactly what it means. Now, does that mean you can't use big vocabulary, what we call 50-cent words? Of course not, but it means you only use a large vocabulary word when a smaller one will not say the same thing. You don't use ebony if the word black means the same thing. It's inappropriate. Why do you want a big vocabulary then? Well, because of nuance. Because sometimes that huge word has a little slight twist to it, a little nuance to it, so that it is the only word that says exactly what you mean. And then, and only then, do you use large vocabulary words. But how else is vocabulary affected by your consideration of audience? Well, let's look at these two columns on the board here. The first column over here is a vocabulary chosen for an academic audience, which is who you'll be writing to. This over here is for Rolling Stone magazine. If you were choosing between the two, you could write in a different way and should write in a different way. It would be totally inappropriate to use the word dude in an academic paper. It would also be inappropriate to use profanity in an academic paper, in most cases. And usually in an academic paper, one avoids using I, in my opinion, I think, I believe, in favor of using things like one position is, some think, a main point is. These are more appropriate to academic writing. But remember, wherever you write, the vocabulary is going to change. So when you think of the theater, think of audience. And when you think of movies, think of audience. But when you think of writing, especially argument writing, I want you to think of audience too. From the moment you pick the issue, through choosing what structure you're going to use, through the vocabulary, through the tone, all these things matter in relationship to audience.